All right, almost there. Sorry, my YouTube feed is going a little slow, so I'm waiting for that to load up right before I get going. Hello and welcome to PMP Live. I'm Alan Watkey, part of the events team with Politics and Prose. Thank you all for joining us today with Toufah Jallow celebrating her new memoir. At any point during the event, this is freezing. At any point during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase Toufah's book on Politics and Prose's website. Sorry about this. Let's see. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining us today on PMP Live. We're celebrating Toufah Jallow's book, her memoir today, an incandescent and inspiring memoir of resilience from a courageous young woman. Toufah Jallow is an African anti-rape activist who inspired a Me Too movement in West Africa. A compelling and poised speaker, she has told her story to a nation on live television, as well as to reporters from the BBC, the CBC, NPR, New York Times, the Globe and Mail, Guardian, Al Jazeera, and many others. She has spoken before the United Nations, presented at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and given testimony at the Gambia's Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission. Jallow heads the Toufah Foundation in support of survivors of sexual assault in the Gambia. She lives in Toronto, where she is studying to become a sexual assault victims advocate. Toufah will be in conversation today with co-author Kim Pittaway, the executive director of the MFA in Creative Nonfiction program at the University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so without further ado, I want to welcome to PMP Live, Toufah Jallow and Kim Pittaway. Thank you. Hello.
Hello, thank you so much, Alan.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Thank you. So Toufah and I are delighted to be here and to join you in conversation this evening, and we'll have some time for participant or attendee questions at the end of this evening's session as well. So if you have questions as we're going along, please type them into the Q&A box because we'll be able to see them a little bit more easily there than if they go into chat. So please do type them into the Q&A box. So thank you for having us here this evening. My name is Kim Pittaway, and I'm greatly honored to be sitting side by side with Toufah Jallow this evening. Toufah and I have spent lots and lots of time in conversation over the last couple of years, but not very much of it with an audience. So this is our first time in conversation with an audience, I think, isn't it, Toufah?
Yeah, it is, totally.
Yeah.
Except
So,
for the Marilyn Bitterman.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We did some initial interviewing in Toufah's agent's apartment, and we also did some interviewing on the streetcar in Toronto. So we had a little bit of an audience there too, but not quite the same as this. So I'm delighted to be able to have this conversation with Toufah tonight. All through my conversations with Toufah as we worked on this book together, I had to keep reminding myself that Toufah is still in her 20s. And I hope that doesn't sound like a condescending thing to say, but it's just that all through this, I've been so impressed by Toufah's astuteness of her political and gender and racial and social analysis on all kinds of issues. And And I wish I had been anywhere near as understanding or as astute as she is when I was her age. I've learned so much in working with Toufah on this book. And I'm sure that the conversation with her this evening will enrich you as well, I hope. So Toufah, I wonder if maybe we can start with a story, with a question from the very beginning of all of this. As Alan mentioned, you told your story to Human Rights Watch. You've told your story to the media. You've told your story to the people of the Gambia, the Truth and Reconciliation Reparations Commission hearings. Why was it important for you to tell your story in a book? What was it about a book that was different than all of those other platforms?
Right. Thank you so much for having me, Kim, and for those beautiful remarks. I think, I wrote the book in a state where I was thinking about how do we make sexual violence a story that we can share, and because the experiences are shared experiences, how do we bring the stories to homes and corners that we can't reach physically or through 5-second clickbait videos and headlines? Storytelling is important because it brings to life experiences and feelings that we hold and that we understand, but ever so feel lonely, that we are the only ones feeling or experiencing it. It was important to write a book because I felt, the stories were shortened and they were explained in a more simplistic way. And 10 minutes or even an hour or 2 hours worth of conversation in person is not comparable to writing in books. And I thought about all the times I was inspired by written stories and the way I was invited into people's homes and their lives through books. So I thought it was important to write a book, to go into all the little corners and the nuance that I can't possibly explain on camera. That's why I wrote that form. I used that format to write.
And it's funny because, when we embarked on this, it was pre-pandemic. So we thought that we would have lots of time in person to do all kinds of interviews. But in fact, we met in January of 2020. We managed to have 2 long weekends of face-to-face time, and then the pandemic stopped everything. So Toufah and I spent lots of time on WhatsApp and the telephone, back and forth in conversation. When one of the first things that you said to me when we met that first time in January was that one thing that was so important to you was that Western feminists tend to view African women and Muslim women in particular as victims, and that you didn't want us to replicate that on the page, that you viewed your mother and your grandmother as feminists, that they're strong women, and that even though they might not have had the same range of choices that many women in the West, but certainly not all women, have, or the same resources that many women in the West may have, that it was still important for us to convey them with dignity and to show their strength on the page. Can you talk a little bit about that and about your mom and your grandmothers?
Yeah, that is so interesting because if you remember, whilst we write the book, it's during the writing of the book that I get to affirm some of those beliefs, right? To view my mother or my grandmother as a feminist got more strengthened as we write the book and the more I had conversations with her. And I'm like, hold on. And for me, when I was telling my story for the first time, if you'd ever told me I'll find myself in a position where I'm trying to find, okay, the different types of feminisms I'm hearing, it's not being bridged by certain experiences, and I do not find myself fitting any of the boxes. And why is that? It stemmed from hearing conversations and questions as to, okay, you became a feminist because you came to North America and you got certain experiences. And obviously, for you to come to a place of speaking out against a dictator who had ruled brutally for for over decades. How do you come to that place? Of course, there must be some influence of Western feminism, if not entirely. And then you have the other part who were also believing in that one story that, oh, no, you couldn't have garnered such strength or views on feminisms from where you come from. And it felt wrong because it made me question, where was the first no coming from, And I remember brainstorming this with you when I was in that room, standing in front of the most powerful man that I've ever known within my sociocultural society. I don't know where the no came from. The conviction to say, these are my boundaries and I have every right to tell you not to access it. Where was that coming from? And it had to come from a place where I was learning these things from my mother or my grandmother. They might be subconscious at the time, but, watching my Auntie Mary, who I talked about in the book, watching my mother set boundaries, even if they didn't say it in very clear terms as the Western feminist would, they took decisions in their life when it was very difficult to do so. You had a great grandmother who is selling her jewelry to build a mud house, to establish my family. You have a grandmother who never went to school, but made sure all of her kids went to school, made sure my mother went to college, made sure my mother went to university. And then realizing that, oh, probably my mom and grandmother does not fit the term feminist because they're not maybe speaking English or they're not saying in clear terms. Or perhaps you have a mother who went to university, but also is existing and experiencing and accepting to live in a family compound with over 20 siblings of mine and being married to a man with many other wives, right? And it's how do we hold these two things together? And it's to say, I refuse to say that there's only one version of it that works. And I'm trying to find my place in the middle of that. I am trying to say, yes, I did foment my feminist ideas by being in another part of the world. But what it actually did, it's confirmed to me that I had every right to say no, not necessarily instill the conviction of saying no. So I am of these two parts and I am right there in the middle. So that's what I mean. And that is why it was so important to talk about all of these women around me, close family members, and in my society who have inspired some sort of resistance and feminist resistance. And it's to say, hold on a minute, I am not a product or my storytelling or coming out with what had happened to me is not as a direct result of only one kind of feminism, but it has been instilled and it has been ongoing generations before I came into the picture. I am just the new breed, probably the more visible feminist. That's what I was trying to put across.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because as you mentioned, I mean, as we were going through the process of working on the book, there were lots of times where you and I would be talking and you would say, wait a minute, I have to call my mom and ask her this question, or I don't know what I don't know how she made the decision to go back to school. So let me call and ask her. So that it sort of opened up this whole additional conversation with your mom about her life and the choices she made along the way as well too, didn't it?
Yeah. Oh no, totally. Conversations that I wouldn't have had, maybe, most likely. That is one of the things I'm most grateful for these books, is that I got to really understand not only myself, but my mother and many other women, because I thought I did until I realized I did not. And it's an opportunity of a lifetime, is to have a pen or have a recorder and say, well, I'm asking you these questions, but to, guys behind the idea of I'm writing a book. So I have, I have some sort of right to ask you that. Because if not within that context, I cannot imagine in what way or in what context would have asked some of those deeply personal questions. Because, as if you read the book, you would realize as well, it's not the type of conversations we usually have. The love language is not, steeped in storytelling, for example. And my mother and her personality, if you go through the book, it's do as I do, not as I say, because he's not saying much anyways. So it was it is one of the things I am so grateful for in writing the book. Totally.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Your story begins in the Gambia when you participated in this educational pageant that was sponsored by the then president, Yahya Jammeh, dictator. And the prize in the pageant was supposed to be a scholarship to study anywhere in the world. What was that young girl, what was that Toufah hoping was going to be the result of winning that pageant? What were her dreams? How did she see her future?
Oh, so, I mean, she dreamed of possibilities. Yeah, for a girl who ended up in college to study a program she didn't really want to, but because she had to be in college, as mom would say, and then to find yourself in a situation where you're told you can pick any university in the world. I mean, it's just from point A to just Z all of a sudden. And then I was just filled with also pride in knowing that I competed for that. I spent nights trying to go through my speech that night, trying to make sure that dress fit, trying to learn a whole new instrument, right? So I felt like I earned that win, and I was ready for whatever it brought. I was hoping to study in the arts field, and I was hoping to open probably some art center in the Gambia, or I will be well known for that, but just the very idea that I can sit at a table and pick any university was so exciting for me. And then thinking, oh, my mom went to school in the Gambia and she was educated, but I would be educated in the United States or Germany or somewhere else. That was a lot for me. That was something to look forward to. So when I think about that moment and when I stood there and when I cried and the feelings I had, in a million years, if you had told me that I would probably be sitting somewhere and pointing at some random country because any country would do, or I would be scared to sit in front of a classroom, the very reason why I competed, I wouldn't have believed you. But that girl was hopeful. That girl was a girl who believed that her nose mattered. That was a girl who believed that she had complete autonomy over her body. It was a girl who was hopeful, and it was a girl whose mother had taught her that she could be whatever she wanted. And that was a girl who also believed in the fairy tales that society do tell young women. In as much as you work hard and you do what you're supposed to do, you will be fine.
Right. And then, as we know from you telling your story, that Jammeh exploited that enthusiasm. He praised and sort of brought you closer, held you distant, did that whole sort of manipulative dance. Until he eventually proposed marriage, wanted you to become a second wife, and you say, you were a girl who thought you had the right to say no, and you refused him because you wanted to continue with your education. He sends you away, telling you to think about it, and then he and his helper Jimby trick you into returning, and he assaults you brutally. In the days that followed, you sort of talked about how you hoped that he would leave you alone, and then realized that once Jimby started calling you and trying to bring you back to the presidential properties, that he wasn't going to leave you alone, and that you needed to get out of the country. And you made plans to do that, and you made plans to do that secretly, without telling anyone in your circle, without telling anyone, even your mother. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like in not telling anyone, and why it was important to make this escape on your own, what the risks were for the people around you?
As I listen to that question, I'm saying, it's so interesting that now my survival and freedom and lifting weight off of my shoulders depends on me telling my story,
Right.
Towards, right?
Mm.
But at the time, my survival depended on not telling a story. And that was important, not for me or for my family, but within the context in which we live. And that's why I took time in the book also to talk about Gambia and what the political climate was like. And we were in a dictatorship, right? I was born in 1996, and this man had been in power my entire life. The idea of elections and having another president, or seeing anything on TV, like, panels where you are like, no, that prime minister is lying. It's not my reality. And it was all nice and singy and praisey. And for me, never being politically in tune with what's happening, not because I choose not to, but because the environment was in such a way, you have to go out of your way to get to the truth. You have to be interested. You have to poke around and see who is anti the dictatorship and get some knowledge. Not someone who was busy trying to act theater and read the news as I was doing. So there was a lot of ignorance in my decision. And when someone reads the book or you listen to my stories, you're like, there must be so much wisdom and thinking at the time. But it was also deeply rooted in not knowing what was going on, in being very naive and unaware of the very many Gambians that are buried in mass graves and murdered and disappeared and tortured, So as I stood there in front of a president and said no to a job opportunity, to say no to a marriage proposal, which I thought was a joke, to say no to when he wanted access to my body, a lot of it was coming from the fact that I was told I could say no, but also from not knowing the consequences of what it meant to say no. And that is why I still ask myself, and these are ongoing questions, why is it that even in the face of terror, when I saw those eyes that I remember so vividly, I still stuck to the no, like my mouth couldn't say anything else.
Right.
Because in that moment, I think I was not naive about who he was or what he was capable of. In that instant, one time after 20 something years of my life, or 18 years of my life at the time, I was aware, I felt the brutality in his eyes, and I still kept saying no. So I think him coming back again to request for me what led to me running away, he must be thinking to himself as well, it's not like she doesn't know, because I'm sure he also saw the naivety in my eyes. And I, after receiving the second call, when what had happened to me, and I realized instantaneously that not telling the story is the best way I can protect not only myself, but my mother and my siblings and everyone else around me. Again, understanding the type of mother my mother was. And it was so important to say in the book, because a lot of people were, especially within the Gambian context, why wouldn't you tell your own mother, right? And is to say, I did not tell my mother because I thought she would be mad at me or she would judge me. But I didn't tell my mother because I know her nose were as solid as mine were, with zero power. All that it was going to do is get her jailed or killed, or all the other consequences that Gambians have been facing and experiencing for the past 22 years. So I held on to my silence because it protected me. Not only Jame, but it protected me. And that was the truth, right? It was difficult, but it felt like a duty at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult, but I felt like it's the only option I had. I know telling my mom, she will also tell someone. In fact, she would match to some state house or some ministry. And I felt responsible to protect my mother, and I felt responsible to protect my siblings. So I held on to my story because I knew at the time it had no power.
Right.
Really.
Right.
Yes.
I wonder if now is a good time for a short reading from the pages of the book.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can start with the prologue. I think that's a nice, sweet one. I hope it is. But let's see. So, it is December 2020. I sit in front of a computer screen with my friend and colleague, Marion Volkman Brando, watching the rough edit of a short documentary we are producing together. Over the course of 25 minutes, clips of me competing in a 2014 Gambian scholarship pageant are intercut with images of the man who ruled my country for more than 2 decades. An all-powerful dictator whose death squad murdered and tortured at his command. Clips of powerful men from other countries appear as well. Harvey Weinstein, who used his position in the film industry to intimidate women into having sex with him. Jeffrey Epstein, who trafficked teenage girls and young women. Mexican drug lord El Chapo, who declared that young girls were his vitamins because raping them gave him life. Should I add allegedly? It has been 6 years since I was declared the winner of a national pageant sponsored by my country's president, promised a scholarship to study anywhere in the world as my prize. Instead, President Yahya Jammeh raped me. I became a victim in the Gambia, was a fugitive in Senegal, and then a refugee in Canada. At 19, I started my life over, a survivor of rape, separated from my family, afraid I will never see them again, worried they would suffer if I told anyone what had happened to me. Should I add allegedly? As I rebuilt my life 7,000 kilometers away from the country I'd grown up in, I struggled with depression, with my secret, with loneliness. And then the dictator whose crimes had forced me to flee was deposed and driven out of the Gambia himself. I was able to return to reunite with my family and eventually to tell my story, first to human rights investigators, then to international media like the New York Times, The Guardian, the BBC, and CBC, and my country's Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commissions, TRRC. But people kept telling me I should always say allegedly. The strange thing is people and institutions aren't nearly as adamant that allegedly be attached as a qualifier when they speak of murders ordered by Jammeh, when they talk of torture carried out at his instruction, when they detail financial crimes committed as he drained the country's coffers. No one attaches allegedly even to his claims of curing cancer with herbal treatments. The insistence on using allegedly when it comes to rape can't be explained away as simply protecting the rights of those not convicted, because the word isn't just attached to the person named perpetrator. It is attached to the crime itself. He allegedly raped her, morphs into she was allegedly raped. And it isn't something that happens only in the Gambia, only with Jammeh. As I watched the news in my small apartment in Toronto, I noticed the same tendency in reports about other crimes in Canada and abroad. When men say they were beaten or assaulted, the word allegedly is rarely inserted. When someone says they've been robbed, allegedly almost never appears. But when a woman says she was raped, her assertion is often framed as she claimed she was raped, or she was allegedly raped. Whether in the Gambia or Canada or the United States or the United Kingdom, when women say they were raped, the men they accuse are given the benefit of the doubt. The women, they are simply doubted. When my country's Truth Commission set out to tabulate Jammeh's crimes, they continued this cross-cultural tradition. In October 2019, they published a list of teams for an upcoming round of hearings and only attached the word alleged to sexual violence, not to torture or to the killings, not to arrest or to witch hunts. When it came to witness testimony, The names of those accused of other crimes were broadcast and published, but with the exception of Jammeh himself. Witnesses were instructed to refer to the rapist by a number that corresponded to a secret list of names. Doubts benefit keeping rapists anonymous, while torturers and murderers were named. Some rape victims remained anonymous too, giving evidence on the pseudonyms. A few testified under their names, but asked that their faces not be shown. I understood their reasons. In the Gambia, as in many parts of Africa and in Western countries too, to say you have been raped places you at a risk of stigma and further harm. One of the victims testifying before the TRRC had been raped as a teenager, then forced into an arranged marriage afterwards to save her family's honor. Her rapist wasn't punished, but she was. After I was raped, I didn't tell my own mother until months after it happened. I thought it would be a secret that will die with me. Instead, it became a secret that almost killed with me. It became a secret that almost killed my spirit, almost killed me. But now I want people to see me, to know my name, to see someone who has been raped stand proud, be strong, and survivors are strong, even those who remain hidden. They have to be strong to still be here with us to move on. I want girls like I used to be, girls who do not know what rape is, who do not even have the words to describe it, to see that you can survive this journey through the unknown, to see a visible survivor, to see I have survived, and to find strength in that knowledge. And I want rapists to carry the shame so often placed on their victims instead. In the days and weeks, months after I first spoke out, others in the Gambia spoke out as well, sharing their stories using hashtag #IamToufah. As the momentum built in this West African Me Too movement, I realized the world's interest in me was not because of who I am, but because of who my rapist is. A former president, a dictator who has rubbed shoulders with the world's most powerful leaders. Ironically, the status the world has given him gives me more visibility. And so I launched the Toufah Foundation to use that visibility to draw attention to the survivors whose rapists are not presidents, to redirect the power attached to his name to the fight for justice for all victims of sexual and gendered violence. Because my life now stretches across 2 continents, bridging Africa and North America. The campaigns we are developing draw on the lessons and insights of feminists in both the West and in Africa, reflecting the strengths of women around the world. In June 2015, Yahya Jammeh, then the president of the Gambia, raped me. He has never been charged, never convicted. And because of that, the world thinks I should use the word allegedly. I won't. He thought he would get away with it, tried to erase me. I thought I would never speak of it, that I would remain invisible. We were both wrong, because I am here, shining like the sunrise of the melanated coast. I am Toufah Jallow. This is my story. That's the prologue.
Thank you, Toufah. Thank you. It's so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah.
The life that you have now is much different from the one that you might have imagined as that 18-year-old pageant winner. And I'm wondering if you had the chance to go back and speak to that younger version of yourself, what would you say to her about, what would you say to her? What would that conversation be?
I will first thank her. I have to thank her because she was wiser than I am right now, I think, and stronger than I am right now. And after thanking her, and I just that I would tell her the skills she had at the time, her way of thinking, her love for family, and her sacrifice for her sick brother were all so important for what is about to come. Because being a fugitive in Senegal and a refugee in Canada and sleeping in the streets at night or trying to find words and navigating TTCs in an unknown country where you've never decided to be in the first place takes a lot of what that girl had to put together and navigate. And I think I would tell her that when she was saying no, she wasn't crazy, and she earned and have every right to compete for a scholarship, to step in that house, to demand that projects be implemented by her country's government, that they owed her that, and that was okay. And that so much more is possible for the future. I think mostly what I will be doing with her is just trying to figure out, where is she from? Why was she so strong? I admire her. Right now, I don't know if I'm doing anything strength-wise, but I don't think I'm thinking like I did at the time. And thanks to her, I am here. And thanks to her experiences, because most of the stories shared in this book is from the perspective and the thinking of that 18-year-old. And that's also what, I told you that I was trying to do, is that although I'm writing the book now with new insights and new ways of thinking, I wanted to write each of those moments as it felt at the time, as I was thinking about them at the time. So not, the added thought process I've had to it, or blur out the way I was thinking, because now that's how I think. And I wanted to really be clear about where I was at the time. But I'm mostly just grateful for her.
Well, I think that she, I don't want to presume to speak on her behalf at all, but I think that she would be filled with admiration for you as well, because I think that she would see the strength that you do carry forward so clearly, because it shines through, and I think we all see that. We do have some time for questions, so I know that a couple of folks have put questions into the Q&A box, so we'll get to those in a moment, but please do, if you have a question, pop it into the Q&A box. You mentioned in that prologue, and also it's in the first line in the dedication of the book, where you dedicate the book to all the victims whose rapists are not presidents. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that, and how you're hoping to connect with those survivors through the pages of this book?
Yeah. Again, what I was trying to admit in that prologue, because I had to ask why me, why the visibility around my story, and it's to accept and acknowledge that it's not because of me in person, but it's because of the name of the person that has abused me. And it feels like a responsibility to put the story out there to represent those whose rapists are not presidents, because the world doesn't care much, unfortunately. Being raped by a president come with some sort of privilege in this very twisted, unfortunate world, but it is the truth. And because I became exposed to many stories, and a lot of younger women and boys sharing their experiences and stories with me, and they're not any less horrific than my story. And if they were to write to a news outlet or come out and scream out what their experiences are, would the world listen? Would they be in the front page of the New York Times? Would they have the opportunity to write a book? No. And so it is a responsibility on me, as someone who has been exposed to those stories and those voices that have not been heard, to represent their stories, our shared experiences, and to acknowledge that was a part of that, to say there are many people behind me, many people have inspired me to write this book. And I'm writing it because if I don't, it would be such a waste of visibility. And I am connecting with them and trying to, in this book, by trying to show them the process it took to get to speaking out, right? And then to take away all the fancy, looks behind it that, oh, it might probably take a very kind of special person, a special type of strength for someone to speak out. And it's to say, oh no, I go to an interview and I do the interview, and maybe even after this event, and I will go into the washroom and bawl my eyes off or go like, oh my God, that was also, the human stories, right? The ones that are so often kept away from victims, that makes them feel like they're not experts in this conversation, or they need some sort of spatial training, or that they necessarily have to find themselves in Canada or North America or somewhere different from their home countries to do so. I wanted to show that it is possible. Why? Because this and this and this is exactly how it happened for me. The first time I jumped on that computer, the little things that inspired me to tell my story and then to write this book. So I hope it resonates, and I hope they find comfort and sisterhood or survivorhood in the fact that those that are very visible, whether it's in the United States or in Gambia, use the interests of the world in their perpetrators to bring visibilities to other survivors.
And I think it's so important it was so important for us in the book to be honest about the steps and the challenges that you faced along the way, and your journey in building the strength to speak publicly as well, right? And I was just so struck in our conversations about that, about how in this, it was almost like you were in training, taking these small steps and some big steps, but to build the muscles to be able to tell your story. And I think that that's so instructive for anyone who has experienced any kind of sexual violence, to see the reality of the moments when you were really down and struggling, but also the moments where you were able to build those muscles and move forward. And I think that that's such an important part of your story. We do have some questions in the Q&A. Margaret Whitley says, thank you for the reading, incredibly powerful prologue. Can't wait for your copy of the book to arrive. Margaret's asking how you ended up in Canada. So this is a little bit of a funny story, but how you ended up in Canada, and how specifically you ended up in Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge sections of it on the book because it was such a long journey. But I ran from my country with just, with a veil on. I had to put on a hijab. It was Ramadan in the Gambia. I had to take a little canoe, which is made out of wood, cross across a river into Senegal, spend a night outside trying to connect with people that I felt like I trusted at the time. I ended up meeting some head of police. Jammeh was making calls to Senegal to have me sent back. I was under protective surveillance in Dakar. And I was just going around. It's, the book is taking you through all these different offices I had to knock on, all these human rights groups that I had to meet and tell them I cannot go back to my country. And this decision was so prompt. I made the decision when I got a call to answer to Jammeh again after I was already raped, and I could not imagine allowing that to happen again. Mm-hmm. So I was in Senegal. I went around. I went to UNCHR, had a couple of meetings, terrifying ones, went through the whole immigration process. And Canada was the fastest to want to have me in as a protected person in the time frame that worked for me. So I was lucky to have Canada accept me. And honestly, I was in it just to keep the whole thing really shorter than the book. I went to the International Organization for Migrants, and a guy told me, yeah, Canada wants to have you in. So there's a couple of cities. There's Vancouver, it is cold, there's this, there's that. Where do you want to go? I'm like, I don't know, like this is not a country I've looked to or imagined myself in or understood which part of the world it was in. And, so he figured that I was really confused with where I wanted to go. So he was throwing a couple of comments there that probably will inspire the city I would choose. And he said, Toronto is industrial, you can get a lot of jobs along those lines. And it's very diverse. So a lot of different people, and a lot of Black people, to be specific. And then I pointed my finger at it on a map. I didn't get the chance to Google and look at images and be picky. And I did not mind as long as it was in Gambia. So I pointed a finger on Toronto, and Toronto it was. So I went through a refugee settlement program and all of that good stuff. And just also bringing you along that journey. What was it like to come from a small country in Gambia and find yourself in a big city like Toronto? With a settlement program that also thinks you know everything, or you figured it out. So, but yeah, in short, that's how I ended up here.
Yeah. Question from Carol Marsh. Toufah, first, thank you for having the courage we heard in your prologue. Second, how did you come to trust Kim as your co-author? Was it difficult to be vulnerable to the extent that was needed for the book? And did you learn in the process of this cooperation or this collaboration?
It wasn't difficult, the birth of this book, it's such a funny story. I mean, I was trying to run projects in the Gambia, and I was trying to meet a lot of, and when my story was public, a lot of embassies were meeting me that were based in the Gambia. And so a guy named John Chrysler, who was a Canadian diplomat at the Canadian embassy, was also one of the people that I was so interested in meeting, because I was so biased in a sense. I'm like, oh, I'm meeting the British High Commissioner in the US, but all of them can wait because I need to meet my Canadian people. So I met John, and we clicked so well, and we were having tea, breakfast, some type of food at a restaurant. And, he's like, what tribe are you from? Because now that he's in Dakar and Gambia, he's familiar with the different cultures and tribes and languages that we speak. And as I got into my family story and my grandmother and all of those things that are not in the articles, he said, I would love to read your story in a book. And I said, oh, great. I know, but the time to write it, or I'm not a writer, I write, but I keep them personally. I not for people to see. And then he said, you know what, I'll make some connections. I know some pretty good people, a good agency in Canada. I'll keep you in touch with them. So he gave me the contact of two people. And one of them was Marilyn Biderman from Transatlantic. And then you have Kim. And then we met at a restaurant. We chatted a little bit because I was thinking, let me meet her and see if that works for me. And I remember telling her, I don't mind the race of the person who's writing with me. But one thing was so important for me was someone who was able to step out of their shoes and into mine, right? Where we can flow in a sense where I feel like I am not telling you to join me in the story, but you are in the story with me. And from there we've had a couple of conversations, but from that very first date that we had, it was obvious to me that she's a great choice, because he shared some of her work with me, and as we were in conversation, I was listening. When I was done talking, I was listening to her try to talk back at me. I was trying to understand if she understood what I was trying to say. And she was in my shoes, and as we continued writing and going through the book, it was evident that she really did have the ability to, she wasn't from Gambia, not at all, but every time she got back to me, it felt like she had walked the streets, or she had these experiences with me. And when I explained them to her, she always found something to relate to. There was nothing that was out of I haven't experienced that in that way, but I have this sort of story that relates to that. And that was important because it also made me realize the bridge that I'm trying to create really does exist. And also what I really learned is, she is Canadian and I'm from the Gambia and I'm here. And in writing the book, each time I've always thought that it was it was difficult to bring people into your life and into your experiences, but that turns out to really not be true, because I was able to do it with her. I was able to see it because before the book came out, one of my strongest beliefs that people would resonate with the book, Kim was like my trial. So it's like, if she could resonate and understand and find the relationships and connections to these stories, other people would as well. So it is not as difficult as I thought it was to share stories and find commonalities in all of our experiences. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I mean, the other from my side of the desk and my side of the conversation with you, you were such a willing storyteller. I mean, it's a really hard story to tell. So many parts of it are hard to tell, but we were able to, I think, to work together in that way of, you were open to me coming back to you and say, okay, so what did that place smell like, or what was on the walls of the room, and what was the relationship like? And you put up with my dozens and dozens of micro annoying tiny questions for us to get the details down onto the page so that we could bring people inside that experience, because that was what was so important, I think, to both of us. It was to make your world real on those pages so that people could be inside the story with you. So and so much of that is the generosity of you sharing all of those details and us creating those pictures on the page together. So thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one or two more questions. We've got one here from Alice in Delory. Toufah, what are the personal risks you faced in writing this book, and why did you decide it was worth it to put this out into the world? And thank you for persevering, she says.
Not so much. I think being in the Gambia, which I go to very often, is a bit more risky for me still, because the ex-president has a huge following. I mean, he's been in power for a while. So there's a lot of security around my presence in the Gambia. That's just generally the book. I think some of the personal risk that came up, I think it's just one. It's having received advice from a lawyer, or my lawyer, in saying, because there are legal cases to be brought against Jimmy Jammeh, who was the lady who facilitated my rape, and against Jammeh himself. And the whole notion, of course, from a legal point of view, is writing a book really might constrain you to certain things, or there might be small things shared here and there that in the court you might not be able to defend, or they'll be counter those legal concerns from my lawyer, thinking about the future. But then I still thought it was important because, as I said to him, it's that the story remains, it's even a bit more detailed in the book than it could ever be in a courtroom. And again, the book has nothing to do with the legal process for me as I'm writing it now. The idea is to reach young women. And the reason why it was so important to put it out is, right after I spoke out in 2019, there's a lot of stories and a lot of articles out there. There's this three little sides. You have one that is kind of making it seem so impossible to reach the milestone or to speak out because of the power of my perpetrator. So it's, brilliantly amazing, strong person, and even trying to take away my Gambianness to say, whoa, she must be a Caribbean or a mixed race Canadian, because somehow in speaking out, it had to come from somewhere that is a bit more than just a little Gambian girl, which makes it an unreachable position for the young Gambian girl that I am very much interested in. You have this middle ground that was just ridiculing and of course just rape apologist and misogynistic and patriarchal in the sense, that middle ground that was demeaning me, and that was making it seem like I was just some uneducated girl, or some mischievous young girl who was just out there and asked for it, and it doesn't matter. Because my words were so short and the headlines were so short, and that I that's that. Then you have the other part that just wants to box me in this whole identity of just survivor, right? She is just a survivor of rape and she's a beauty queen. So each time you go, and even now, just the other day, I had to address this with everything I've done for the past 2 years since, and the foundation that I run, and now the book that I wrote. When a news outlet wanted to talk about my book, they say beauty queen writes a book, because that is that section where I am just a beauty queen who has been raped, and that is where I stay. And regardless of what I move on doing, that's it. So all of these three different parts, I felt like I need to fuse them together, right? That is in explaining, oh no, these are all the human stories. This is all the difficulties and the challenges I faced, even in speaking out. And trust me, it is doable and you can do it. To affirm that to that young girl, do not mind the headlines that make it impossible. Second, to tell you how it is like and expose the misogyny that comes with a woman talking about her experiences and all the things that you have to deal with and what they sound like. One of my vivid ones in the book is when I step out of a car for someone to help me, and this person is on my side, making a comment like, oh, looking at me from top to bottom, I see why he raped you, right? Meaning I am beautiful enough to be raped. Comments like that I have to survive on a constant. And then the third part, is saying, oh no, I am not just a beauty queen. I am not just a rape victim. I am a survivor. I am an activist. I am a feminist. I am all these many different things that you can fuse together. So these are the three different parts that I felt like, as if they stand alone, they are just getting to a couple of different groups, and they all have their different ideas on what surviving looks like. And I wanted to bring that in one, because all of those are combinations in me. That's why I wanted to put the book out into the world.
Well, Toufah, as you went through that list of the labels that people attach to you, I think the word that I come back to again and again is that you are an inspiration. You've inspired me through this process of working with you on the book, and I am certain that your book is going to, and your story and your life is going to inspire others as they find their ways to the page and find their way to you. As you think about, you could project yourself 10 years into the future, what impact do you hope this book will have? How do you hope this book will change the world, change reality?
I think it's in the next 10 years, looking back at the book, is that I tried at least to bring a wholesome look to who I am and was in that moment. I think it's to make myself and my story and the journey accessible to whoever. And, I talk about this blueprint in the book. It's also realizing that I am, in a way, a blueprint for speaking out against a powerful person in the Gambia. And most of my decisions to react or not react publicly, what I said or didn't say, where I appeared, what I gave my time to, all of this I did, keeping in mind that there's a young person sitting there, there's a victim somewhere, man or woman, who is thinking, I also want to speak out. And Toufah just did for the first time. So what does that look like? What does it entail? And for me is to say, when they, for example, if they find me having to defend myself on Twitter or scream back at people back and forth, they would also include that as a part of their blueprint to say, oh, so you're trying to tell me if I speak out, I also have to have the strength and the internet to be online to fight back? I don't think I can do that, right? So it's to be very conscious about what I indulged in and what I didn't. So I am hoping in that blueprint, whoever is looking to it or trying to understand it does not only see the headliney part of it, but sees the whole story. And I hope the book is seen as a celebration of all types of feminisms and the struggle that survivors and women go through. I hope it is seen as a continuum where I am trying so hard not to tell you it's an A to B journey and to C. No, I am telling you it continues, and there's the blueprint we're going to adopt from each other, and we're going to keep at it. And it's not the end, not for me, not for whoever is reading the book. And also, I really hope the people that are often see survivors as not human beings, as just survivors or victims. I hope they find full stories. I hope they meet my brother. I hope they meet those old women in my community. I hope they smell the Gambia through the book and the food and the culture and all of the things that made me. And I hope they understand as well why I denounce and reject some of the things that I grew up with. And I hope we find commonality in it. Really, let's see where the book is in the next 10 years.
That's great. Thank you so much, Toufah. And thank you to all of our attendees for such fantastic questions. And I know there's some great chat going on there as well. So thank you to all of you. Alan, we'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, definitely in the chat, there's lots of support and love going out to you, Toufah. And Kim, Toufah, thank you both so much for this. It's such an honor to have you both on here for your first event for this book. And to be able to have Kim on here as a co-author as well is just fantastic. You can give your support to Toufah by purchasing her book in the link that I put in the chat. I also would encourage you to look up the Toufah Foundation and give support there, give love there, lift that up as much as you can, because we all know we need to lift that up. So Toufah, Kim, thank you both so very much for joining us on PMP. And to everyone, I just want to say thank you for joining us. It's your support that keeps us going. So you all have a good night and stay well read. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Politics and Prose, for having us. This was great. Thank you, Kim.